What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you by the Hockey News. I'm your host, Emma Lingan. I am joined today by Michael Augello and Adam Kierszenblat of the Hockey News. We've got lots to talk about today, including a trade to announce, but we'll get to all of that in just a moment. Before we do, want to remind you that for over 75 years, the Hockey News has been the ultimate hockey fix. Now get 12 issues delivered straight to you, packed with stories, stats, and a bonus gift issue to kick things off. Head over to thn.com and get in on the action. All right, guys. Well, first off, congratulations to the Carolina Hurricanes, your Stanley Cup champions. And the dust has barely settled, if it's settled at all, from the end of the Stanley Cup. And we've already got moves happening. We've already got trades. So John Chayka has made his first big move with the Maple Leafs. He traded goalie Joseph Woll and defenseman Simon Benoit to the Philadelphia Flyers for blue liner Emil Andre, goaltender Samuel Ersson, and a third-round pick in the 2026 NHL Draft. So Andre is kind of the piece here for Toronto that they're getting back. He's 24. He played 61 games for the Flyers last season, had 13 points. Meanwhile, Sam Ersson is 26 years old, made 33 appearances for the Flyers last season, and had a 14-11-5 record. So that comes out to an .870 save percentage and a 3.12 goals against. So, Mike, I have a feeling that you've got some thoughts on this trade, so I'm going to hand it over to you. What do you think it means for the Leafs? Are they, opening the door for one of their younger goaltenders here to kind of take over? And what was the logic behind moving on from Woll?
Well, if they're opening the door for other goaltenders, I can't be Anthony Stolarz because we know he'll be on IR by November. I think this is a big swing and a miss by John Chayka. His first deal as Toronto general manager. Woll, I think, was his best goaltender. It could mean that they have a lot of confidence in Dennis Hildeby, who played really well in a short stint last year. Artur Akhtiamov, who is leading right now 2-0 with the Marlies in the Calder Cup final, is 24 years old and I think has a future, but I don't know if the future is next year. So Sam Ersson is, he's played 143 games in the NHL and has an under 900 save percentage. So that is not somebody who screams a starter for the Leafs. So right now their goaltending is in flux, which could mean that there's another move that's going to be made before the beginning of the season. But I look at this where Andre is a mobile defenseman. Chayka talked in his opening press conference about getting more mobile on the blue line. He will do that. They clear almost $5 million in cap space with this trade. They add another draft pick. So this could mean that they're going to be active in free agency, or maybe they're going to, flip draft choices someplace else to add a player. I right now, the first move, it's sort of, if it's an entree to other moves, okay. But I think right now this is a move that does make a lot of sense and I think is a loss for the Maple Leafs.
Adam, what do you think of this trade? And looking at Andre, like like Michael said, that is going to be the most, kind of the biggest piece that they're getting in return. But looking at Ersson, I mean, he's a pending RFA. So do you think the Leafs are going to re-sign him?
Yeah, I don't really understand what happened with this trade or how this negotiation even started. But yeah, if you acquire Ersson, you have to re-sign him, right? You don't make this trade unless you're re-signing him. But yeah, I just have a lot of questions about what is going on with the Leafs and goaltending, and from just an organizational situation, what they're thinking. How much confidence do they have in their young goaltenders? Are they going to take a goaltender in this draft? But then on the Philadelphia side, Joseph Woll is going to be a very good backup. My only concern about Philadelphia is that now, you're probably going to sign Dan Vladar for long term, which you shouldn't, because we know how goaltending works at this point, where if you reward a goaltender who had one good season, it hasn't worked out, especially when the goaltender is on the older side and they have quite a few younger prospects coming up that are going to need time. So I think that there's also like a fundamental misunderstanding about goaltending in general. Like, you can't have these goalies sitting in the minors, like being blocked for 5-6 years. Like, you need to give them those opportunities. So on both sides, it doesn't I don't really understand why this trade happened the way it did from a goaltending perspective. But yeah, I mean, we'll see what the rest of the pieces are able to do. But yeah, overall, just a little bit kind of confused on how they came up with this trade.
Well, like you said, goaltending can be one of the most important, but also one of the most fickle positions, I think, in this game. And we saw that in the Stanley Cup final, particularly with the Carolina Hurricanes. They made a goalie change midway through the final, and that ended up being a huge bet for them. And speaking of the Hurricanes, I think that after they've won the Stanley Cup, you got to give a ton of credit to Eric Tulsky, the GM, because he's been able to adjust and assemble this roster in such a unique way. After, of course, took the big swing, acquired Mikko Rantanen. That swing ultimately missed, as we now know. He managed to pivot, acquired Logan Stankoven, Taylor Hall, Keandre Miller. He signed Nikolai Ehlers in the offseason. He then took that chance on Brandon Bussey, who ended up being the goalie that won the series for them in the final, played a huge role in the regular season as well. So, Mike, when you look at Tulsky's style of management and also understanding the market that he's in and knowing that, you need to kind of be unique with how you manage your assets, how do you think it's translated to the on-ice success that they've had in Carolina?
Well, I mean, they've been able to get players signed on very economical deals, be proactive on those deals, and I think it's going to pay off. I mean, two of the most valuable players for them in the playoffs were the Mighty Mites, Jackson Blake and Logan Stankoven, and both of them have been signed to long-term extensions for very reasonable cap hits. He was able to pivot on a deal that didn't turn out great, which was flipping Marty Necas for Rantanen, and they knew Rantanen wasn't going to sign there, so they turn around and they trade him for 2 first-round picks and Stankoven, who was great in the playoffs, and then they flip one of those first-round picks to get Keandre Miller. So everything sort of stemmed from a move that might have not turned out, and we've seen them trade for Gensel, trade for Rantanen, and he's been able to pivot, and that's the mark of a good general manager. You have to do that. You have to read the landscape. They didn't overpay to keep Brady Shea. They didn't overpay to keep Brett Pesce. They made the right moves, and it's paid off in a championship.
Well, Eric Tulsky has definitely, he's got a lot of attention for his unique background as well, coming into this role as general manager in Carolina. So, Adam, how do you think that his background has helped him, and what do you think of the moves that he's made, like Mike alluded to? How do you think that they've been able to help contribute to that on-ice success?
Well, it shows that, you don't need to be a former player to be a successful GM. Some nerds are pretty smart. We'll just he used analytics. He built a team that he knows. He didn't try to fit square pegs into round holes. That's like essentially what it is. He did contracts with guys like Jalen Chatfield. He has one of the strongest, he really built like a really strong bottom six. There are players on that team that other teams they basically gave up on, and Carolina was like, we'll give you an opportunity. Like Jordan Martinook was on waivers a couple years ago. Every NHL team had a chance at Jordan Martinook. Nobody took that chance. Now he's a Stanley Cup champion. And they've just built like incredible depth. Yeah, you talk about Stankoven, Blake, and Hall, that line. Like all three of those guys that line should have won the Conn Smythe. No offense to Stahl, but like one of those three guys, probably Taylor Hall, should have won the Conn Smythe. But yeah, this is going to be very interesting to see, because we are in a copycat league in the NHL. It's always, Vegas wins and teams try to get bigger, and then Florida wins. Oh, there's a big stress on getting bigger. Now Carolina wins with, Stankoven as a 5'8", 5'9" center. Are we going to see teams going maybe we can use smaller players? Like Shane Gostisbehere is another example, right? Like Shane Gostisbehere is a player that Philadelphia gave up on. Post Carolina wins the cup. Like, it really is just an interesting situation where it's like you build the team around the team. You don't build the team around a superstar. And we also have to give tons of credit to Rod the Bod, not just for his coaching, but the ability to, I guess, lift and throw the Stanley Cup in the air and then catch it. That may have been one of the most incredible athletic achievements of the Stanley Cup playoffs.
I think the copycat part of Carolina is going to be speed, and more speed. It doesn't matter how big you are. It matters how tenacious you are, and it matters how fast you are. And if you're 5'8" like Stankoven or 5'8" or 5'9" like Jackson Blake, and you hustle like crazy and steal the puck and win battles, there's a place in the league for you. So I think everybody in the league right now is accentuating speed. So I just think that's going to continue with Carolina winning the Stanley Cup.
And that smothering style of defense that they played as well, even the defensive play of the forwards. I mean, Vegas just looked lost by the end of that series. And you know, speaking of which, I think a big part of that for Vegas is they were kind of lacking contributions from certain guys, particularly Jack Eichel. He had just 2 goals in 22 games in the playoffs this year. So that dates back to last year's playoffs now. He has just 3 goals in his last 33 playoff games. So Eichel's consistently been one of the team's top goal scorers in Vegas during the regular season, but you know, it's now 2 years in a row that we've seen him kind of struggle in the postseason. So I mean, Mike, when you look at Vegas and their loss in the cup final to Carolina, obviously it's never going to be just one thing or just 2 things. But when you look at, you know, sort of the conjunction of reasons that they couldn't get it done, how much of a role do you think Eichel's offensive struggles played into that?
Well, I think you have to, say, he had 22 points in the playoffs. He only had 2 goals, but he was involved offensively. He tied for the lead for power play points. He was playing 22 minutes a night. He was a distributor of the puck. Ideally a guy who's logging those kind of minutes, you want him to score goals. Everybody's presumptive Conn Smythe Trophy winner until the end of the series, Mitch Marner. He outscored him in 1 period, 3 goals to 2 for the entire playoff run. But Mitch Marner didn't score a goal other than that period in 10 straight games. So he didn't score against Colorado, and he didn't score except for that 1 period against Carolina. So there's enough blame to go around. If you look at Vegas, Brett Howden scored a bunch of goals. Dorofeyev scored a bunch of goals. The difference between them winning and not winning was probably their big guys not scoring enough. But Carolina suffocated them defensively. And I can't put all the blame on Eichel, just like I can't put all the blame on Marner.
Well, that's big that you can't put all the blame on Marner, Mike. I think that's a real sign of growth for you. But
most of the blame, especially in games 5 and 6.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Adam, when you look at Vegas and the way that, that they were just not able to respond in the cup final. I mean, again, you can't put it all on Eichel, and no one is suggesting, I think, that you should. But when you look at just things that could have gone differently for Vegas, how different do you think this series might have looked if Eichel had turned it on a little bit more in terms of goal scoring?
Well, I think that, the games would have been close, but what we also have to remember is that that Hart had one of the worst statistical Stanley Cup finals since analytics have been created. So that did play a massive factor in Vegas losing the Stanley Cup. But yeah, with Eichel, he was producing, he was playing, Tortorella was playing the wheels off of him. He also just he kind of looked tired. And this goes back to what we've talked about throughout the year with the Olympics, that whole, winning the gold medal and then the partying afterwards and not getting an actual break. I do wonder if he just kind of ran out of gas, and if other players on that Vegas team just kind of ran out of gas a little bit, overall. But Yeah, I mean, like, he was producing, he just wasn't goal scoring, and I don't think, like, yeah, well, Jack Eichel has had a history of goal scoring. I don't think that's necessarily like the biggest part of his game. As Mike said, it's more of a like playmaking style with Jack Eichel, and he's being used kind of in that shutdown role. So yeah, it's probably a little bit disappointing that he wasn't able to put the puck in the back of the net. But yeah, you look at the point total, you look at the contributions, they were there. He was just a little bit snake bitten in the end. And he also just I also think that when the pressure starts to get to you, players stop shooting a little bit. Like that might have happened with Eichel, where it's like he might have passed up some shots, like trying to overthink in those situations, especially when you're down in a series or tied in a series.
Well, I will have to take your Jack Eichel and raise you a Jacob Slavin if we're going to make the Olympic conversation. I think that is, it's something that's certainly going to be brought up a lot as something that, could play a role in a lot of these guys' seasons. But at the end of the day, Carolina was the better team in the end, and they won. Shifting gears here a little bit, before we know it, it's going to be the draft. And then before we know it, it's going to be July 1st. And we're going to start to see, some moves happening, free agent signings, and potential extensions for guys who are on expiring contracts. So one of those that is a big name to keep an eye on is Cale Makar in Colorado. So Joe Sakic talked about his future at his end of season availability last week. He sounded pretty confident. He said Cale's going to finish his career here. We're already talking to his agents who are confident that something's going to get worked out at some point. He's got another year, but this summer we expect to have him signed. So Makar, of course, has one season remaining on his 6-year, $54 million contract, so making $9 million annually. That deal he signed in July of 2021, so he is eligible to sign an extension as of July 1st. So Mike, obviously Joe Sakic sounds very confident that Cale Makar is going to be back in Colorado. We know that he is not going to come cheap, though. So what do you expect him to earn on his next deal? And I mean, if there's this confidence that he's going to stay in Colorado, do you think that he could take less than expected, sort of a hometown discount, to try to build a stronger team in Colorado?
I think he already did that on this last deal, because he could have made a lot more than 9 million AAV. And I think it's going to be show me the money this time. Maybe he takes a page from Nathan MacKinnon, who could have been paid more than $12 million. But I look at the, Colorado's cap situation, and they have 3 forwards in Arturi Lehkonen and Nicolas Waugh and Ross Colton dropping off after this year, and that opens up $11.5 million in cap space. Now, they have to replace those guys, but with the cap going up, I mean, Makar could end up being the highest paid player in the NHL. That's right now Kirill Kaprizov at $17 million. But with the cap going up, potentially, I think the figure I heard was 120 next year. That's $16 million in extra cap space. That's all going to go in the pocket of Cale Makar.
Adam, what do you think?
I think that at 3 p.m. and 1 second, you're going to see a tweet from the Colorado Avalanche that say that they've signed Makar to an 8-year deal worth $16 million. I think that, yeah, I think that Makar could probably make 20, but I think that he'll take a little bit less to help build around. And I mean, we talk about hometown discounts and all of that. Like $16 million is a lot. Like, I know that it's not 20 million, but it's still a lot more than, majority of the people on the planet are probably going to make in their entire lives. So I think that, 16 mil per year is what we're going to see Makar come in at. And then I also think that's going to be interesting because it's going to obviously reset the market, because we also talk about the Quinn Hughes contract. Hughes is also eligible for a contract extension. What's that going to look like? So I think that it's going to be interesting to see not just what Makar gets, but if Hughes will take more money whenever he decides to sign with whoever he decides to sign.
Yeah, lots to keep an eye on there. That is all going to potentially be going down July 1st, maybe immediately, like you projected, Adam. But before we get to any of that, we've still got the draft. And our producer, Eric, was actually able to speak with one of the draft prospects, Chase Reid, at the CHL Awards on Monday. He took home the top draft prospect award, and he is entering the 2026 draft as the number 2 ranked prospect in North America by Central Scouting. So this is really impressive for him, I think, especially considering just 2 years ago, Reid was cut by his USHL team. He was playing Tier 2 junior hockey in the North American Hockey League, and he'll now potentially be a top 3 pick in Buffalo next week, which is just really impressive for him. So, Mike, what do you think about this rise for Reid throughout his young career, and where do you think that he'll ultimately land on draft day?
It's definitely impressive. I mean, he took advantage of an opportunity to go to the Sioux, and he really thrived there. Now he's going to end up going to Michigan State unless he makes the NHL, as an 18-year-old, which for a defenseman is usually, Matthew Schaefer sort of defied logic when it came to that. From everything that I've heard, I mean, obviously McKenna is going to be the number 1 pick with Toronto, although early on there were some mentions of, the Leafs wanting a defenseman and maybe going that way, but it sounds like McKenna is, like a 99.9% he's going to go 1. There's a lot of talk about Reid going 2 to San Jose, but there's just a group of defensemen in this draft with, Rudolph and Smits and Reid, and it's just really a great accumulation of young defensive talent. So if he doesn't go 2, I don't see him going out of the top 5, but it all depends on what some of these teams, they might like particular traits of these defensemen, and a guy like a Smits who might be more closer to making the NHL after playing at the World Junior and the Olympics. Somebody like that might be a little further ahead, but Reid in a year or 2 will probably be in the NHL and be a very good one. So I think he's going to go 2 to San Jose.
Adam, you think he goes 2, or do you think he falls to another team?
Well, just based off of what we saw at the Combine, I think that San Jose is either going to go with Chase Reid or Keen Verhoff if they keep the pick. If they trade it, then all chaos, breaks loose. But I don't see Reid dropping below 4 in any situation. Like, I think that, if he's there at 3, then that's also a situation that the Vancouver Canucks will look at, because if you can pair Chase Reid with Zeev Buium for the next 10 years, like that's a pretty good pairing right there. But yeah, like Chase Reid, you got to give him a lot of credit for what he was able to do. He was part of this big wave that came over to the CHL. He dominated in almost every single area of the game, was one of the best defensemen in the OHL. And like, that's hard to do on just in general, like when you're in your draft year. So I think that he has a lot of upside. And I think that NHL teams love those mobile defensemen, and that's kind of what he is. Play in all 3 zones, can play on the power play. I don't know, exactly. I know that some people say that he can be a number 1 in the NHL. We'll see exactly how he develops, because it's kind of hard to project with defensemen how they're going to look. But I mean, if you're getting Reid, you're getting at least a top 3 defenseman on any team. So I think that's a good investment for any team in the top 3. And even if you're Toronto, I would 100% consider taking Chase Reid, because those right shot defensemen are always very difficult to find. And if you want to try to get them in trade, you're going to be paying crazy prices a lot of the time.
Yeah, very true. Well, right now, Reid again projected at number 2 to San Jose. But we've seen in previous years players get taken well below their expected draft position, well above their expected draft position. It happens every year. I mean, just last year in 2025, Brady Martin went 5th overall to Nashville after he was widely considered to be, probably more in the 10 to 12 range. And then just the year before that, Beckett Seneca was shocked himself when he was taken 3rd by the Anaheim Ducks. So, Mike, when you look at this year's draft class, is there anyone who you potentially see being taken higher than expected?
I was at that draft in Vegas, and I was shocked as well. I'm like, Seneca? Okay. well, being at the combine and talking to a lot of people who are smarter than I when it comes to prospects, the name that popped up was Alexander Command. Now, the center crop in this draft is not particularly strong. That's one of the reasons why Caleb Malhotra is rumored to be selected, maybe third overall by Vancouver. And Command is somebody that is, originally was probably a mid first round pick. Now he probably could be at the top end, like 11 or 12, or even get into the top 10. So he's somebody that a lot of teams are intrigued by. And so I'll say Alexander Command.
All right, Adam, anyone for you?
Yeah, so I'm going to go with London Knights defenseman, and apologies if I mispronounced the name, but Maxim Sokolovsky, I believe that's what his name is. And so he was 40th on the NHL Central Scouting list, and I think that there's a chance that he might go in the first round because of the fact that he's 6'8", 240-pound left shot defenseman. We know that NHL teams love big defensemen. I know that there were a lot of teams, I believe almost every single team had a meeting with him at the combine. You can't teach size. And I think that his size along with his skating is what makes him such an intriguing prospect, because players of his size don't move like he does very often. And yeah, I think that that's a name that that we could see, or it's so weird with him because it's he could go in the first round or he could go 60th overall. There seems to be this massive range because nobody really knows what's going to happen, after 15 or so. It just feels like everybody is all over the place, but that's definitely a name that I think don't be surprised if he goes in the first round, but at the same time, don't be surprised if he goes 55th overall. I think that's fair to say with this prospect.
Well, that's definitely a fun name to keep an eye on as we get closer to the draft here, both of those, to see where they go. There seems to be a lot of variation in terms of the projections at the top of this draft class. I think it's going to be really exciting. But before we get to the draft, the next major date on the NHL's offseason calendar is June 17th, tomorrow, when the buyout window opens up. So if we're looking, around the league, now we know that buyouts don't happen incredibly often, but they do happen. So, Mike, if you're looking around the league right now, is there anyone who stands out as a potential buyout candidate to you this summer?
Well, closer to home with the Buffalo Sabres, they only have $12.9 million in cap space. I don't believe they're going to use that to sign Alex Tuch, but one player that they might buy out is Jordan Greenway, who has struggled with injuries over the last couple of years. He was healthy for the playoffs. He's a $4 million cap hit. He only had 1 goal in 40 games. They could save $2.7 million in cap space by buying him out. That's now in the past, it was anathema for the Sabres to do a buyout, but under Jarmo Kekalainen, I think maybe he has a little more flexibility. And now that they're a playoff team and they want to sign players like Zach Benson and Bowen Byram to deals, they may have to clear out a significant cap hit. The other one for Toronto would be Dakota Joshua. He's got 2 years left, just under $4 million. They would save significant cap space on that, but that only makes sense if they have somebody that they're interested in targeting in free agency. The buyouts are always interesting, and we always list a number of names, and they never seem to come to fruition. But this year, even with the cap going up, I think there's a possibility that teams will go down that avenue.
Well, and then I think sometimes you see the inverse too. Guys like a few years ago, Matt Duchene, I don't think anyone had him pegged as a buyout candidate, and yet he was. So never know what's going to happen here. But Adam, any names on your radar as potential buyout candidates this summer?
Well, going back to the Carolina Hurricanes, I think the big name is Jesperi Kotkaniemi, close to $5 million or just under $5 million for the next 4 years. Didn't play in the playoffs. It feels like they're ready to move on, and it will be interesting to see if Carolina can move him as a cap dump, or how they're going to do this. And also it's going to be interesting if Carolina is interested in having a buyout, because we know Tom Dundon doesn't necessarily like to overspend on the budget if he doesn't have to, but that just feels like a player that needs a fresh start. Like, it's not going to work in Carolina. They have the Stankoven and Blake contracts that are kicking in next year, and while they're not like ridiculous, they're still raises. So I think that what we saw from the fact that Kotkaniemi didn't play, that name makes a lot of sense for potential buyout, or at least like we'll move him and we'll give you like one of the last like cap dump trades that we see in a while.
The one thing, Emma, about this is Kotkaniemi is young enough that a buyout will be 1/3, not 2/3. So now we know Carolina never wants to do anything like that. So they might do something that Adam suggested, like throw in a draft pick to move him someplace else. And he is a center. And we know that the league, a lot of teams need centers. So if there's somebody out there that thinks he's worth a risk and a roll of the dice, then they might be able to move him. But that buyout option at 1/3 rather than 2/3 is very attractive.
Yeah, I'll be honest. When I saw him celebrating on the ice at the end of Game 6, I was kind of thought to myself, "Oh, I forgot that he was still in Carolina." So yeah, it's definitely. I think that could definitely be a really strong buyout candidate in Carolina for Kotkaniemi. Definitely a candidate for a fresh start, I think. Well, we started the show today talking about a goalie trade. Now we're going to wrap things up talking about a potential goalie trade. Has not happened, may not happen. But Mike, I want to get your thoughts on this. We've talked a lot in the past about actually two things. One is the Montreal Canadiens goaltending situation moving forward, and number two is the Oilers goaltending situation, which seems like a perennial topic of discussion. So when you're looking at the Canadiens, they're most likely looking to move on from Sam Montembeault. If so, do you think that he would be a fit for the Oilers? And what could the Oilers give Montreal in return? Would Kent Hughes be willing to do the goaltender for negotiating rights to get like a right shot defenseman, a guy like Connor Murphy? Do you think it would be a good bridge? What is your feel on this?
Well, if Stan Bowman is interested in collecting bad goalies, then that would be something interesting. I would think that they'd want to re-sign Connor Murphy because, a right shot defenseman, veteran guy. They gave up draft picks to get him. So, unless he's not interested in re-signing at Edmonton, I think they would want to keep him. The competition with goaltending right now in this league, Adin Hill is going to, Vegas is going to try to move Adin Hill. There have been reports about New Jersey wanting to move Markstrom. We know about Devin Levi in Buffalo and Sebastian Cossa in Detroit. Maybe Toronto is still going to move Anthony Stolarz. There are a lot of goalies on the market right now. And Montembeault, was not good last year, and they, Dobish took over and Fowler came up at the end of the year, and that's your tandem for the foreseeable future. So unless Kent Hughes is willing to eat 50% on Montembeault's contract, which is over $3 million, I don't see them being able to move him.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough one. You mentioned all the goalies on the market right now, and that's not even to say anything of free agents. Stuart Skinner, very familiar with Edmonton. He's a free agent now, or will be starting July 1st. So, Adam, what do you think happens with Sam Montembeault in Montreal?
I think that the goalie market is a little bit too crowded at the moment, and so I don't know if Montreal is going to be able to get something for Sam Montembeault or even move him. Like, we also know that, or we've heard, Jesper Wallstedt is a name that like teams have been talking about potentially going after because Minnesota has Gustafsson, and like Montreal also is in this situation where they have Dobbs and Fowler, right? Like, how's that going to play out? Because both can't have the crease. But I'm also interested to see how this, Mike Babcock situation plays out in Edmonton, just because there's already been enough reports that have come out that said, that if Babcock is hired, there are going to be players that either refuse to be traded to Edmonton or ask out of Edmonton. Like, this is not new reporting. This is like enough people have said this. Enough people have talked to players. People have talked to agents that this narrative has now been created. So I wonder if like when it comes to Edmonton, like even if they want a player, if this whole Babcock situation plays out and he's hired, like are they going is a player going to say, you know, I want to go there? And even if they don't have any trade protection, like, you know, you don't want, like, GMs don't want to piss off agents. Like, this is a very common thing. So, like, even if there's no trade protection, does a GM say, listen, Edmonton is asking about you. Do you want to go? And then, does that play out down the line if, you know, a player doesn't want to go a certain place? So it's going to be very interesting to see how this whole situation goes out. But I think Montembeault, I don't think he's going to come back to Montreal next year. Like, I think they'll find a deal, but I don't think the return will be anything close to what it would have been maybe last year.
Well, if you want to read anything at all about the robust goaltending market, the Stanley Cup final, the Mike Babcock saga, anything that we've talked about here on the show today, of course, you can head over to the Hockey News. It's been the go-to for all things hockey since 1947, 12 issues packed with game and player insights, plus a free issue to start. It's a must-have for any fan. Head over to thn.com/free and grab your subscription today. That's going to do it for today's episode of The Wraparound. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. We'll be back with an all-new episode this Thursday. But for now, for Michael Augello and Adam Kierszenblat, I'm Emma Lingan. This is The Wraparound, and we will see you next time.